That's a lot of the fun of the work I did was Sam has some very sophisticated tools and things in his workshop. I stuck with all my hand tools, and everything I did was made with my hand tools, and of course the only motorized things, mostly besides electric drill and stuff like that, was the buffing machine.
I mean, when you take over the shop after your dad's death in '64, you start developing your own clientele, a lot of who already knew you, but you became, let's face it, kind of famous in your own right for what you did.
Well, yeah, I started my own designing.
Right, which was more modern, really, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I got more into the contemporary. I didn't want to imitate my dad's work. And his work in some ways became outdated. It was a lot of floral motifs and things like that. And I went into contemporary in the early 60s. In fact, I was cited in one publication as one of the top young designers in contemporary art that started the contemporary art movement in the United States. Pearson and there was about 8 or 10 other contemporary artists doing different kind of contemporary work from mine. And so I got inspiration from architect books because my work is more geometric and pretty plain. And the technique was fabrication. Everything was made out of separate pieces and assembled into the whole. So I started my own designing, some of them based on sort of our Thunderbird shop with a more contemporary look, working with silver and turquoise. But I started working with faceted stones and other gemstones, cabochons.
Did you work with gold at all?
Dad never did much gold work. He didn't like working with
What about
gold.
you, though?
Not much. I was working mostly silver, and I started making more elaborate pieces. I entered a lot of juried design competitions all over the country. I'd send my work there, and I would started winning some awards and things like that in different places. I was in shows at the Museum of Contemporary Crafts a couple of times. In fact, one of my pieces was featured in one of the show catalogs. And so I was developing more of a national reputation.
Did you ever consider going to like New York or Chicago or something like that?
No, we never wanted to get that big. You know, one of our good clientels, Dad's and Mom's clientels, was Stanley Marcus from
I knew Stanley.
Neiman Marcus. Right. And he wanted Dad, he bought a lot of jewelry, and he wanted Dad to expand his operation and carry his jewelry at Neiman Marcus in Dallas. And Dad said, no, I don't want to get involved in such a bigger operation that I would sort of lose. I would spend my time supervising other people doing things and not doing my own creative work.
He's right about that. So
he didn't want to do that, and I never had the idea of trying to expand like that either. But I inherited my dad's clientele, which was knowledgeable and well-to-do, and I started developing my own clientele because my work was different. And some of these people would say, you know, my son is going to be ordained a priest. Could you make me maybe design me a chalice or something like that? So I started getting involved in doing a lot of ecclesiastical commissions. And actually my best work, along with my contemporary jewelry, was that kind of work. And people didn't know I did that kind of work because it was all commission work. And as soon as it was finished, there's always a deadline. My son's going to be ordained. I have to have it by so and so.
Right.
So I'd finish a piece and off it would go to Tulsa or Dallas or someplace. One of my most ambitious projects was called a monstrance for the Church of Christ the King in Dallas. It was a piece of silverwork that was 36 inches tall. It had almost 15 pounds worth of silver.
Is this the one that had aluminum as well?
Oh, no, I never worked aluminum.
Oh, you never did? Okay. There was a big cross that you did, I know.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did that. But that's different, too. So I was doing this all in silver, and the only requirement the people wanted was that it be set with coral and turquoise.
Mm-hmm.
So I made some designs and sent it to the Monsignor to look at. And he said, I don't know which one I like better. Could you come? So they paid my way to Dallas. And when I saw the scope of the church, I said, oh, this is too small. It has to be bigger than this. So he picked a design, and I made it and shipped it off to Dallas.
That's the one. That's a cross, right?
Yeah, it's a cross form.
I saw an image of that actually. It's got big round cabochons of turquoise and coral, right?
Yeah.
We'll try to include that, and people who are watching the video, YouTube, I'll try to include a picture of that so they can see what
that
we're
would
talking
be nice
about.
if you could do that.
Yeah, absolutely, we can do it.
Because it's one of my major.
Yeah, it's amazing.
As far as size and scope, it was my biggest project.
Mm-hmm. Really sculpture,
in working in sterling silver. But I got commissions for all different kinds of things in different places.
Mm-hmm.
So that became my specialty. And again, as I said, people here in Tucson didn't really know I did that kind of work. I was known for my jewelry work. So at any rate...
and at some point, you get your material into the Smithsonian as well, right?
Yes, jewelry.
Yes.
But I had commissions in New York, and my work's in San Francisco. It's Virginia. It's in a lot. The commissions for a lot of different places, pectoral crosses for bishops and all kinds of things like that, rings. I made a pectoral cross for the Benedictine Monastery in Three Rivers, Michigan, and the abbot. He was being promoted to abbot, so I was commissioned to make his pectoral cross, and I got a very nice letter from him saying he loved the cross, and he said I have an intercessor for life. So I thought that was really nice that he would include me in his prayers.
Yeah.
So, it was very satisfying kind of work. And almost always it was, I was free to do my design what I wanted. As I said, usually the only requirements were the color of the stones. I made a chalice for the family in Tulsa, and after a son was ordained, he went to the Holy Land, and he came back with a little round box with a glass top, and it had a little splinter in it, and he said this was supposed to be a splinter of the true cross. Of course, there must be enough splinters around to make 5 or 6 true crosses. I don't know, but it was very precious to him, of course. So his father, they commissioned a reliquary for it. So again, I made a cross for him, and the only requirements were his dad and his favorite colors, which were blue and green. So it's set with lapis and malachite.
Yeah.
So.
And those go out, and those kind of never come back on the market, I would assume.
No, belongs to the family. Yeah. One of my fondest designs was a memorial cross I made for my father, which was at St. Michael's Church here in Tucson. But I got commissions for tabernacles, And again, nobody saw it. It's in a small chapel at San Carlos, Arizona, the sisters. It was an interesting project. A tabernacle, it holds the vessel that holds the consecrated wafers. They would consecrate wafers, and if they didn't use them all, they put them in a vessel shaped sort of like a chalice, only a bigger bowl.
Right.
It was called a ciborium, and it was put in a tabernacle because it represented the body of Christ. So I made this tabernacle. I guess it's about about this big in diameter and
about 8
this
inches
tall.
by 12. Yeah.
It's made out of brass, but I made it out of 1/8-inch thick brass. It was quite a process to shape sheet brass into a cylinder.
Yeah, and you liked
in my workshop.
You liked working in brass, right? I mean,
Brass is a nice metal to work with. It filed and cut very nicely and polished very nicely and soldered nicely. But anyway, when the sisters saw it, they said there's a problem. The tabernacle's supposed to be covered with a veil. And the father who commissioned it said, "Oh, how do we solve this?" So I said, well, I made like a shower curtain ring inside the tabernacle, and that had the veil. So when they put the ciborium in it, the veil was there, and then they would close the door. So the sisters were very happy that they could see the tabernacle and not have it covered with a veil, and yet the ciborium was. So all sort of interesting things like that would pop up.
Did your heart sink when they said, no, this doesn't work?
No, they just said it's a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah,
so
and there was probably a lot of those in your career. There were lots of problems that needed to be
solved.
Well,
that was that's a lot of the fun of the work I did. Was Sam has some very sophisticated tools and things in his workshop. I stuck with all my hand tools. And everything I did was made with my hand tools. And, of course, the only motorized things, mostly besides electric drill and stuff like that, was the buffing machine and for polishing the pieces. And I had to get a larger buffing machine when I was starting to make larger pieces to be able to maneuver around them and polish. I had a commission to do a trophy, the Callaghan Trophy, for a golf club, Skytop Golf Club in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Apparently, Mr. Callaghan was the one who devised the handicap system for golfers. And I guess he was involved in the country club there because they commissioned me to make a trophy for their golf tournament. So I made a trophy cup that's 18 inches tall. And so that was
Was that out of silver or brass?
No, all silver.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What if it's still at the golf course, at the golf club?
I'm sure it has his name, and I had I commissioned a very good woodworker to make the base for it because they would put little brass on who won it. So apparently it's a big major part of their history now. So I accepted commissions without really knowing how to do them. I figured I'll figure it out.
And you're still making jewelry all along as well.
Yes, I was making jewelry too and entering shows. And when they put together at the Tucson Museum of Art, the Stonewall Foundation featured a 3-generation show,
right?
And that's how we got involved with the fellow from the Smithsonian came out. And with Joanne Storer, who sort of put the show together.
Yeah, and they did a catalog on that as well.
They did a catalog.
Yes.
And she made sure he saw our work, and that's how we were able to get each of us 3 generation into the permanent collection of the Smithsonian. As far as I know, we're the only 3 generation family there.
Right.
And since my first piece, I have another piece there too. So I have 2 pieces of my work in the permanent collection of the fine arts arm of the Smithsonian, which is the Renwick Gallery.
Well, it has to be gratifying that your son, Sam, went into it as well. I mean, he's carrying on the tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's rare to have a 3 generation any business.
Yeah. Let's see, what was I?
And maybe your great-grandson might, too. I've heard he enjoys it.
We'll find out.
If he's out there living. So you closed the Santa Fe shop when? When did the...
Dad died in 1964 in February. So we kept it open with my aunt and my older sister Joan taking care of the shop, and the silversmith still working. But our lease was up at the end of the year. Oh, in the meantime, the shop had moved on to the corner location, so it was a bigger shop. And I've only been in that shop once or twice in my life. I was raising my family in Tucson and living permanently in Tucson. I very seldom got up to Santa Fe, although I missed it a great deal. So, we closed that shop, and we're out of Santa Fe for a period of time.
And so you closed it fairly soon after your dad died?
Yeah, at the end of 1964, and he died.
And then another shop opened back up. That was your Pat. Who opened the Thunderbird shop back up in Santa Fe?
I did.
You did. Okay. I didn't know if it was somebody else.
No, what it went into the corner was a dress shop.
I see.
And then Packard's went into it.
And so when did you do that?
Donna and my wife, I had remarried. And my wife Donna, she was like my mother and dad. She took over, managing the books and all that kind of stuff. And I forget when we did that. In the location we're currently in now, in that long row building called the Santa Plaza building. Oscar Branson had a shop there called the Treasure Chest.
Right, I remember that.
And the landlords were Henry Hughes, who bought that section of the row building, and his son Stephen, who was an attorney. Henry was an attorney. Took over his father when his father retired and died. Stephen became owners of the shop that fronted on Palace Avenue, and he also had his office. There was a patio, and he had his office and space in the back. So Oscar always said, you knew Oscar. I don't know if people, he was an old-timey trader who was very innovative and did a lot of his own designing, but he carried the work of Zuni fetish carvers, and he bought kachinas, and he had the full range. And had silversmiths working sort of under his tutelage, but he concentrated more on traditional Navajo styles, mostly jewelry, squash blossoms, and things like that, but with his own sort of touch to them, and the work was always very good work and very marketable, very popular. But Oscar said, I would like to get out of retail in Santa Fe. And after hearing him say that 2 or 3 years, I said, Oscar, are you really serious? And he said, yes. So Don and I spent a little more time in Santa Fe. And when Oscar said yes, we talked to Stephen, the landlord, and he said, yeah, Oscar could leave his lease and I could sublet it for a while. Anyway, I took over the lease. And so we leased the building, and Donna and I came back into Santa Fe with the Thunderbird shop. And I guess it was, I need to look it up because I often think about it and I don't remember when it was. I think it was probably the early 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a period of time when we were not there, but we were back. Thunderbird shop was back in a different location. And
how long did it stay open?
we were there until 2007. We bought a home in Santa Fe, and Don and I spent a little longer season. We kept the shop in Tucson, and so we had two shops.
You commuted. I know that feeling. I did it for many years myself.
Yeah, going back and
for
forth.
20 years, yeah.
Yeah, going back and forth, and
and all that goes with it.
all that goes with it. But we had the benefit of living in each place at the optimum climate time.
I love that part.
Yeah, Santa Fe was wonderful.
Just you never
in
got
summer.
a break when you're working in a shop, 24/7.
Yeah.
12 months a year.
But Donna and I managed to get away and have some very nice time. We liked to fly fish, for instance, so we spent time.
You did better than I did. I never seemed to find the time until I sold my shop out of there.
Yeah.
So.
Donna did have some health issues, and she had respiratory problems. So the altitude was getting to her, and she could no longer tolerate the altitude.
Also not atypical. It seems like that happens a lot to people in Santa Fe.
Yeah, Santa Fe, 7,000 feet. Yeah. So she managed to go up the last few years, but it was a real effort on her part. In fact, when we came up with one time from Tucson, she couldn't breathe. I had to take her to the emergency room. And
they said, go to Albuquerque, go down.
Well, they did. People didn't know about it. Sleep apnea in those times. Right. She had sleep apnea for years with not knowing what it was, and had it put a strain on her heart too.
Yeah, sure.
Because she had trouble breathing. So finally, she could no longer tolerate the altitude. So I needed to find a tenant for the shops. I asked Mark, would you be interested? Mark Bati.
Right.
Would you be interested in having a shop in Santa Fe? Oh, I'd love to have a shop in Santa Fe. Mm-hmm. Well, I've got the good location for you. Let's work it out. So we did. So Mark came up, and for 6 months we went through a transition period where we withdrew and he established himself. So we both were operating there.
That was about 2008 or so?
Yeah, maybe Mark will remember.
Yeah, when I get him on. He's on
well, it was 2007 when we finally pulled out. Yeah. And that was our 80th anniversary, 1927 to 2007 in Santa Fe.
It's a pretty good run.
With that one period of where we weren't there. So we sold our home. We had a home in Santa Fe at Quail Run, a very nice.
Yep. Well,
I loved it being there because I could walk out the door and play 9 holes of golf.
Yeah, that's right.
And I had the place practically myself with a nice health club and stuff. Yeah. It was really nice arrangement. But we sold our home there and moved permanently to Tucson in 2007. So
and then so when did you kind of turn over the reins to Sam?
It was about the same period, the early 1980s. Sam was working in the shop. Donna said to me one day, it's time we retired and turned it over to Sam. Mm-hmm. So it was really sort of her. She gave the impetus to say it's time to turn it over.
Yeah.
Of course, I enjoyed working with my son, and I presume he enjoyed it.
He did.
But that's the way I grew up.
Did you make him cut out Lincoln pennies with a saw
No.
when he was 6?
No, Sam went a different route. Originally, I don't know what he told you in your interview with him, but he didn't really look towards making the business his career at first.
Right.
He started to take some classes at the University of Arizona, and finally, one day he said he worked in the shop part-time like I did,
Mm-hmm.
and he started taking classes under, what was his name? Harris. He died just recently. I'm sure you knew him.
I don't know who it was.
He was a local designer and jeweler, and he taught classes at Pima Junior College. So Sam was interested in learning some different techniques, so he really expanded out into mokume, which is combining different metals and different techniques than I was working. So he had some outside schooling as well as learning from myself, and I learned a lot from our Indian silversmiths too, even when I was a youngster and learning from my dad. I learned a lot, and I also taught them a few things too later on. But finally he came up and said, Dad, I want to go into I decided this is what I want to do. Become a designer, and he didn't necessarily want to run a retail business. So he actually sort of closed the shop. At that time, our location was at 40 West Broadway in the old Adobe building.
Right.
And so he said, I want to pull out of retail and work out of a studio and concentrate on my own designing. So he closed the retail part of the business and started off on his own. Now, I understand, but having a retail business made it possible for us to make enough on other sales besides just depending on my own work.
Right.
And depending on having it on consignment and being sold by other people.
Right.
I could sell it in my own shop, sell it myself. But we also, Don and I loved carrying other Indian jewelry. That was part of the story after Dad died. During the period my mom and Dad were in the new shop at Stone and Alameda, that, people would come and say, oh, this is a wonderful shop. It looks like Gump's in San Francisco, which was quite an accomplishment.
Yeah. Dixon used to sell out of Gump's.
Yeah.
Dixon did.
But after Dad died and Mom sort of stayed in the business for a short period of time and retired it out, and it was entirely my own business. I had people coming in, well, this is a wonderful shop, but I came out west to buy Indian things. I'm not interested in buying imports from India or New York or whatever.
Right.
And I said, that makes sense. So I phased that out, and I started basket makers, Tohono Autumn, or Papagos, they were called at that time, would start bringing baskets in. And I'd say, well, yeah, these would be nice for the shop. And Don and I started dealing with traders from Gallup, and we started taking our old trips on the reservation, and we carried rugs, baskets, kachinas, and some pottery, and we started really getting back to be Indian arts and crafts as well as our own jewelry. Bought full line of Southwest Indian, Navajo, Zuni, and Hopi jewelry in our showcases, along with our own work.
And this was all new material, right? Contemporary?
Yeah. Right. We didn't get into trying to buy older pieces.
Right.
And of course, my own contemporary work in the shop too, and all the special order things we did. So, but having Indian crafts in our shop gave us a broader clientele than just depending on myself working out of a studio.
And more material. So if you have more material and a broader amount of material, you can make more money if you run a good store.
Also was able to keep our Indian
Silversmith
craftsmen employed.
Yeah.
and we worked together with them. We were in that location in the Arizona land title, became the lawyer's title building. It went under some different ownership. And when the lease was up in 20 years, we'd been in that location. The building was getting a little shabby, and
Right.
I thought, well, we should get a reduction in the rent. No, he wanted to raise the rent a substantial amount. In the meantime, a lady from the Historical Society had come in and said, I have a wonderful location for your shop at 40 West Broadway in the old Adobe building. It's sort of a Santa Fe style building. It was built in the 1800s, and so it was one of the oldest buildings downtown. It was made out of Adobe with beam ceilings, and I said, well, I have my hands full with this location. But as I saw that we were coming to the end of our lease, and the rent was so reasonable. The building is owned by the Arizona Historical Society. It was given to it by a very well-to-do woman who was interested in preserving the older buildings, and so she donated it to the Historical Society. So they owned the building, but they didn't exactly enjoy being landlords and having to manage a property. But they did rent space, and they continued. There was a very nice restaurant there that catered to upper class. It was sort of tea roomish kind, but they had Mexican food too, and they had a big following. And I said, the rent was so reasonable. I said, I can afford to open a shop here too, and have the two shops till our lease ran out, because at that time the convention center was built right across the street, and the town was moving back in that direction, moving southwest from the downtown was. So we leased the space. And I built all the showcases, and I did a lot of work on it. Had the floors refurbished, and restained and all that. And I knew Sidney Brinkerhoff, who was head of the Historical Society, so we worked together to make the space. I borrowed some things from there's an old cash register and things like that from the Historical Society, and I bought old-fashioned showcases again, besides the ones I made. I bought a wonderful tower showcase
so
that
you
belonged to a bakery, stuff
you give it
like
that old sense, that old trading post feel.
Yeah,
Did you use the cashier?
No, it wasn't practical to use it, but it looked nice. It was a nice prop.
I have one too. I don't know if you saw it, but I have one too.
Not yet.
We don't use it
so
either.
much to see.
Yeah.
But Sydney allowed a few. They didn't want to change the physical part of the property. They wanted to keep it as authentic as possible. But we were able to do a few modifications and convert a storeroom and the back of the shop to our workshop, and still had room for a display and a display window, which a lot of people who ate at the restaurant were sitting right there. And
do you remember the name of the restaurant?
I think we just called the old Adobe Restaurant.
And so how long were you at in that space?
We were there. The old stuff I remember, the more contemporary stuff.
You were there for a long time.
We were there for several years, yeah. Well, until Sam took over.
Yeah, and then Sam wanted to close down the retail part and just do more.
So we had the full range of rugs and all kinds of things besides our own jewelry, and we continued our special orders stuff, and I continued my own designing and making jewelry as well as doing those ecclesiastical commissions. One thing you mentioned about aluminum was I did depart from working in silver for this one commission. Northminster Presbyterian Church, which is on the corner of Fort Lowell and Tucson Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of a New England style church with a spire and things like that. But they were building a new chapel part, and the architect Gordon Lupke was a local architect.
Mm-hmm.
And they designed it with a big arch in the back of the church, and they envisioned putting something there. And Reverend Rowley had a Celtic cross cast in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 8 or 10 inches tall. And they were shopping around to have something similar done to fit in that niche they had in the back, or the arch space. They didn't really know what they were going to do with it when it was designed and it was built.
And so you got that commission.
So the building committee asked the architect Gordon Lupke, do you know they try to get people from California? The people from California did the stained glass. They said, do you know anybody in California? No, it would do something for us like this cross that I have, this small cross I have. No. So they asked Gordon, and he said, well, you have a man in Tucson who does metal work. His name is Frank Patania. And so he came in and said, would I be interested in this project? And I said, yeah, it sounds like a very interesting project. So I said, I'll make some sketches. And they said it would need to be about 6 feet tall. And I said, well, okay.
Yeah.
But I said, I better look at the location. And the arch was much too big. I said, 6 feet will look out of place. In the arch, there'll be a lot of empty space. It has to be at least 9 feet tall. Right. And he said, can you do that? And I said, well, I truly didn't know how I was going to do it. But I had met a friend, another craftsman, who introduced me to the famous lost styrofoam casting technique. You could carve a model in styrofoam, put it in a box or a form where you could pack casting sand around it. And this is a typical technique where the foundries would make a wooden form, and they would pack the casting sand around it, and they'd take the form out, and the hollow left by the form was what was cast. Mm-hmm. So there was a foundry here called the Knight Foundry that did casting for the mines. They made great big bronze valves and things like that. So at any rate, I was introduced by this friend and craftsman to styrofoam, and I made some styrofoam pieces, which I think maybe will include here for you to have to sell.
Great.
Part of my early work. But anyway, I made some cast styrofoam jewelry. It was a lot of fun. I would take a tin can, cut the bottom out of it, and I would carve a model in styrofoam mounted on a little, the base was mounted on a base, and make a spout for pouring the metal, and melt the metal in a crucible, and I would pour it in, and the red hot metal would vaporize the styrofoam, and it would occupy the space the styrofoam did. And in just a couple of minutes, you could break out the casting sand, and there is the piece cast in silver, sort of with a textured finish.
Almost like tufa casting.
No, tufa, you're sort of limited to flat forms.
Right.
This you can make three-dimensional pieces.
Right.
So, and very different. No, different completely from tufa.
But the sensibility of what you got out was kind of similar.
Yeah, the piece was,
Yeah.
it was flat, but the technique was quite different.
Yeah.
So this is more freer way of expression.
Did you do tufa casting, by the way? Did you ever do tufa casting yourself? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure.
Yeah,
it's right on my wrist.
I did quite a bit
Yeah.
of tufa casting. We'll get into that later after I finish this story if you want to go on with it. I don't know how much film you have or time.
No film, all digital.
Oh, that's right. I am still
card space now.
not used to the new ways.
Yeah, it's battery and
Yeah.
card space.
And if you don't like it, you just erase it and do something else. So anyway, you didn't have to have negatives or anything. But I said this would be an interesting project. I think I can do it by casting it, by carving it, the model in the styrofoam.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I went to look at the location, and it had to be 9 feet tall to me, proportion. So I went to an insulation place that sold styrofoam about 6 inches thick by 12 or 14 inches or so by maybe 6 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
It was blue, and it carved very nicely. So what I did was I had a drawing of the cross, so I took it to Tucson Blueprint and had it blown up to full size. So I had a paper. I glued it on, I cemented it or attached it to a cardboard so it would be stiff. And, part of the story was Reverend Rowley came back with a couple men from the building committee, and I said, I made 4 different design suggestions for you. The first one I showed him was the one that we ended up with. But he looked at it and said, no, absolutely not. So I showed them the others, which were simpler solutions to the problem, but really weren't very distinctive. And I said, Reverend, you have to come back and look at this. This design I wanted to represent something outgoing that gave, something flowed from it. And he looked at it and he said, I am the cross. He said, this vine is like the vine of on the cross. And he just got all inspired about this design.
Uh-huh.
So he said, okay, let's show it to the building committee. So as I said, I had it blown up, took it to the church. The building committee were all sitting there. They looked at it and they didn't like it. But Reverend Rowley convinced them this is appropriate for what we want. It was quite contemporary, and still it expressed a thought of something being more ethereal and rather just a metal cross.
What was the metal that you used in it?
Well, I went to the foundryman, Mr. Knight of Knight Foundry, who did all that commercial work. I took the styrofoam model to him, and I said, that was the one requirement. It had to be silver in color, which was their Celtic cross was.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I would like to have this cast in aluminum alloy. It has to be silver metal. And he said, well, we have alloys we can use.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I've never done any artwork. It's all commercial. He said, this sounds like it'd be an interesting project. So I was very grateful to Mr. Knight that he was willing to undertake this project. So the piece was so big, I made the model in different pieces. And at that time, I didn't know how I was going to join the pieces.
Right.
I got through the part of finding somebody who could do
produce
styrofoam casting for me.
Right.
Completely. They use all the wooden forms and stuff because they had to repeat different things all the time. So I took this one piece, the top part of the cross, to him, and I showed it to him, and he said, this is too thick. The styrofoam didn't weigh anything. If you cast this in metal, it's going to be much too heavy. You got to make it thinner. So from the inside, I didn't alter the design, but I kept hollowing it out. I took it to him a couple times. It's still too thick. It's still too thick. So when I finished it, I could hold it up to the light and see the design. It was that thin where the design would be in the metal. He said, okay, we'll try this. So he had his men pack it in the casting sand. And when they started the pour, the vaporize made so much heat and fumes, they weren't used to that. But he said they stuck with it because they knew it was an important art project.
Right.
And they wanted to see it complete. So it came out beautifully, except it had a finish like it was cement colored, gray.
Yeah.
And it was cast in fine sand, but it had a sort of a textured finish, and of course it had to be polished. So I finished the other parts and had them all cast, and I started, I spent hours grinding it down and then using finer and finer grit. I was using a polisher that had, I found flap wheels that had various grits of emery. They were pieces of paper that were flaps, so it could conform to curved surfaces. Right. So I had this electric tool. It was very heavy. Well, I spent hours and hours grinding and polishing it, but I had to get the pieces assembled. And I didn't realize aluminum. I thought I could send it with, I could do it myself with a welding torch. It wouldn't touch it. So I said, I have to find somebody to put these pieces together. So I went to an aircraft manufacturing company, and they did, yeah, we can weld these pieces together. So I took the pieces to them. I helped the technician, the welder, put it together properly and clamp it down and all of that. And he welded the pieces together. The alloy was very similar in color, but if you looked at it closely, you could see a little bit of the seams.
Yeah.
So then I took it back home and finished grinding and polishing it. And I was working on my carport on 2 sawhorses. So I was working on it flat. And as I said, I spent hours and hours grinding and polishing it. Then I had to carve a styrofoam base for it and take that to the foundry, and they cast that. And then I had to figure out how to attach that. So I tapped and drilled and was able to screw the base onto it. And the ring, the Northminster cross, has a ring around it with openings for the cross. So I cast those in separate pieces because they were much thinner, and I tapped and died and attached those 4 pieces to the back to make the ring. And I finished the project, and I told them from the beginning I couldn't be responsible for mounting it, but I can make the cross. And he said, no problem, we have a contractor who can do the work.
Right. How heavy was this thing?
It weighed 500 pounds.
Oh, Jesus.
Aluminum alloy, almost 500
wow.
pounds.
Did you have any idea what you were getting into? When
No, I had no idea how I was going to do it, no idea how the project was going. I didn't know who was going to cast it. When I had it cast, I didn't know who was going to weld it. I had faith that I could get it done.
Yeah. And at some point, was there a point where you go,
no,
you knew you would get it done?
Yeah, I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah. And it sounds like something like that's really done more for the process and where it's going and its importance, not really money-wise, because this is not something you're going to, for all the time you put into it.
Yeah, almost all my projects, I learned a lot from each one. I undertook projects like that trophy cup.
Yeah.
Never made a piece that scale, and that monstrance I made for Dallas, that was 36 inches tall.
So you kind of know when you're going into something like this is not going to be a moneymaker, really.
No, I figured I could solder the pieces with the equipment we were using, which was just acetylene torches.
Right.
I was working with silver, 10-gauge silver, which is pretty thick
Yeah.
and heavy. And I was trying to solder. I needed to solder 5 layers together. And so I went and bought a aircraft. I had taken welding class in adult education at Tucson High, so I knew welding, oxyacetylene. So I got
They probably don't even teach that now, I bet.
There's still oxyacetylene welding done, but not. It's been the technology has increased so much. So I bought an aircraft oxyacetylene torch, a lighter weight torch that they use for aircraft manufacturing, and I had to get oxygen tanks, and so I got enough heat where I could work a piece of the sludge. Solder it together with silver solder. So I learned a lot as each of these projects was a learning project too, and it really wasn't.
Do you go visit that cross ever?
No, I haven't seen it since it's gone to Dallas.
Oh.
The Tucson cross.
Yeah.
I take people to see it once in a while.
But the one in Dallas you haven't?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
All those pieces, I did a pair of chalices for a church in Washington, D.C., and I haven't seen any of those pieces since they were made. And as I said, nobody in Tucson had really seen them either. The crown I showed it to Ted DeGracia. I was about 30 years. Dad died in 1964, so I was, 32 years?
Yeah, you were. What was he like, Ted DeGracia?
They were friends because Italian, and we carried some of his the prints that he was doing. But anyway, he looked at it and he said, wow, you shouldn't even be able to make a piece like this until you're 40 years old.
Yeah.
He said, I asked him to appraise it because we were giving it to the church.
Yeah.
So he appraised it for us, but he was pretty impressed.
And what was he? What kind of guy was he? I really don't have a sense of what Ted DeGracia was like.
Well, I didn't know him very well personally. Dad knew him better than I did, but he was a nice man. I think he probably had his quirks like most of the creative people do, but I admired the way he took native craftsmen and built buildings and dobies himself and all of that, and did his designs. And he hit it big when he did that card, that UNICEF.
Right.
That put him on the map.
Yep.
So at any rate, he still was free to not hire contractors to build his gallery and stuff. He did it himself with his own workers. So I admired him as an artist, that part of his. Frankly, I didn't like his style very much, but of course, different styles appeal to different people. But anyway, they came and picked up the cross and put it on a flatbed truck and took it from my carport to the church. And they took it inside, and I followed the truck. And they stood it up, and that's the first time I saw it standing up. And wow, 9 feet tall.
That's a big piece.
I was working on a flat. I had no idea of what the scale was going to be like when it was actually standing up. I was pretty awed myself to see it standing up.
It had to be gratifying to see it.
Yeah. So they had built, the architect they built a pedestal as part of the wall. And so the contractor built an A-frame so they could lift it up. And they put it on the pedestal, and they drilled through the back of the wall to attach it to the wall, so it had no chance of falling.
Right, yeah, it could kill it.
Unless the earthquake destroyed the building. So that's the first time I saw it in place. And so the work was finished. And the reaction to the people the church, they didn't like it. I had so many tell me when they first saw it I didn't like it.
Right.
But they said, I see in it what you want, and now it's a part of my life.
Yeah.
We love it.
Kind of like the World Trade Centers. At first, nobody liked the World Trade Centers.
Yeah.
And they really poo-pooed them, and then they became the iconic imagery of America, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure the church feels this way.
Yeah,
about
it
your
represented what they saw in it, what Reverend Rowley saw.
Yeah, took 'em a while.
And
We'll try to get an image of that, too, for the YouTube as well. So
and so that I got commissions to do their baptismal font cover and the two, what they call chalice and bread plate.
So you got
They
some
don't use
more.
a chalice the way other churches where people actually dip or drink from the chalice. It's cast aluminum too, but it's a symbol on the altar. And so I got those commissions from the church too. The font cover was an interesting project. It was about this big around, and it had still the flame motif to it.
So what do you think your legacy is going to be? You've been doing this for basically 80 years. I mean, you start when you're 87.
Yeah.
You start when you're 6. What's your legacy as a silversmith, do you think?
I had to stop. My eye problem started when I was 80, so
Yeah.
that's when I stopped working. But yeah, I grew up and I don't know. It sort of pleases me that people see my work for a long time. I mean, people see paintings hung in homes or galleries that are, several hundred years old, and sculpture from the Greeks and what have you. But people will see this work in one. I like the idea that they'll wonder, what kind of person made that.
Right.
But that's what I think about my legacy, is people will see it. I had a friend when I was really starting my own designing. I wanted to take classical guitar lessons. So I met this very unusual fellow who was teaching, so I started taking classes with him, and we became acquainted, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I make jewelry, but I guess it's nothing very important in the whole scheme of things." And he said, "Oh, yes, it's very important." He said, "When people see a thing of beauty, it drives an evil thought from their mind." And I thought, well, I never looked at it that way. So what you're doing is very, very important. It's just as important as anything else.
Well, and it becomes part of people, too. I mean...
Yeah, that pleased me to hear him say that.
Yeah, I get it.
It made me feel like I was doing something that would do things for people when they either wore it or saw it in place. So, but I don't know. It just pleases me that people will wonder who made that piece maybe a couple hundred years from now when they see the cross at Northminster. If the building's still, if we're still all alive by that time with climate change and everything. So, as I said, it pleases me that people see my work. And
well, I can tell you.
And my dad's work, we have people who are wearing Thunderbird shop jewelry in Europe. "Oh, I bet I know where you got that. You got that at the Thunderbird shop in Santa Fe or Tucson." Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we have Dad has a legacy of his own.
Well, I think especially in Tucson, I see people coming in all the time that have the Patania jewelry on that they've had for 40, 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I wonder, since I've been doing it for so long, I have no idea of how many pieces I've made. But I have sketches. One sad thing is, Dad made sketches, but I don't know what happened to them. Only a few of them survived after he died. I don't know what happened to his sketches.
And you have a sketchbook that you did some of his sketches in, right?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of preserve some of them.
Yes.
And also some of them were things that I could have Jimmy or Harold or Daniel Enos make that would be just as fine of craftsmanship as possible. So, but his own sketches, I have hundreds of sketches of my work, and part of my those bigger commissions, Dad Dad made a sketch and it was in his mind. My work being contemporary, and I describe my style as architectural.
I can see that.
And it's built like a building. It's built out of pieces that are put together. And as I said, I was inspired. Japanese architecture. I saw the sweep of the eaves, a long row with this beautiful curve to them. I did some necklaces using that motif. Just got different ideas from different places. So, but making boxes and things like that, I really needed like a blueprint with actual measurements on it. And so I liked the idea of taking mechanical drawing in high school. But I never did, but I'll show you some sketches I've done. I taught myself, and so I made rather detailed to-scale sketches of the piece before I made them. So Dad's sketch, I have those, I kept them, but Dad's sketches, I don't know. His were sketchy. They weren't fine lines. They were sketchy lines. He's just getting ideas, but it was all in his head. And his more important pieces were in his mind. And the way he worked was, if he had made very elaborate pieces with lots of stones in them. And of course he bought the turquoise from turquoise dealers. So that was part of the business, was haggling over.
Right. And he always had the finest of stones too. He always had great stones.
Yeah. Well, in those days it was available, and turquoise wasn't that popular as it's become. And Indian arts and crafts wasn't really very popular nationally or internationally as it is now. So he had access to a lot of wonderful turquoise, which is not available now.
No, it's not.
And when I see a dealer now show a piece, and isn't this beautiful? And I say, we wouldn't even bother buying that back in the old days.
Yeah.
Because the color is so pale or something like that. And it's backed with DevCon. So you're buying DevCon by the carat.
Right.
The old turquoise was never backed. Of course, they had a lot of loss cutting it.
Right.
So the DevCon serves a purpose. You could use a lot more turquoise than you were able to use before, because it didn't break during the cutting. So it had its place.
You also had all that great coral that he brought back from Italy too.
Yes, he got into using coral, and so that was a major part of our jewelry too.
That was in the 50s, right?
Yeah, and he made a trip to Italy and made some contacts with coral dealers, and he brought back and imported quite a bit of coral, which Sam doesn't like to work coral because it's disappearing.
Yeah, he said he won't buy any more. He might use old pieces that's already there, but he won't buy any new.
I didn't have the thought in my mind when I was working, or Dad, when we were working, or when all the Indians were making coral too. It was very popular. The Santo Domingos made long strands of coral, and jewelry designers like Julian Lovato, where they would use coral too. And there's quite a lot of coral jewelry, and the Indian silversmiths started using a lot of coral. So, so where did we leave off?
So I think where we leave off is just saying what your legacy is, and I'll say what I think your legacy is. I think your legacy is that you have left your father, and your son, and maybe your grandson, possibly even, have left a legacy of quality, of innovation. Each one of you has innovated.
Sam did a lot of different things,
and a legacy, a real legacy of not only native jewelry that you sold and native artists that you work with, but more importantly, maybe to some extent, is your own unique designs of how you saw the world as a craftsman and as an artisan, and that these pieces are heirlooms for generations to come. And so, you're going to be a part of history for many, many families, and hopefully they'll be able to, assuming we still have everything working in the world, they'll be able to access things like this and actually see and hear what you had to say. And I think this podcast is very important for that, to document, your role, your father's role, and your son's role in a pivotal part of Southwest history. I mean, the Thunderbird shop was a pivotal part in Santa Fe and Tucson history.
Yeah, we inspired Dad's style and the way he worked inspired a lot of the craftsmen who worked for him to go on their own and establish their own reputation. I guess Louis LeMay and Julian Lovato's probably the best examples. And Alberto Contreras sort of, I think, overdid a little too much turquoise and stuff, not as refined as my father's work, but obviously a very fine craftsman and a good designer, and he was certainly inspired by my dad's work when you see his work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So not only did we establish ourselves, we had help with a lot of people get started. And as I said, it was so much fun, and I had the experience of growing up with all these unusual people that most people don't have experience. And we had we trained a lot of them ourselves, and some of them were with us for years and years, especially Jimmy Harold and Daniel Enos. Daniel Enos was Jimmy's brother-in-law. Jimmy married Daniel's sister. Daniel he's a Pima Indian from farther between Phoenix and Tucson.
Right.
And he was in the military. He was in the heaviest fighting in the island hopping against the Japanese.
Right.
So he's a veteran, and he came back. He was a welder, and he said to his brother-in-law, Jimmy, who started working with Dad back in the 30s, or maybe even earlier. I'm not sure when Jimmy started working, but it was almost he was one of the longest ones there. Daniel said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, Jimmy said, why don't you try silversmithing? So Daniel came into the shop, and he ended up being a very, very fine craftsman like his brother-in-law. So that's how he got his start. And Jimmy sort of retired out of the business and did some work on his own and for Mark Botti. And Daniel worked until Dad died, but he was pretty close to the end of his career too. And we had a lot of younger people come and go. Jimmy was with Patton in Europe during the war. And some of our other silversmiths that came and went fought in the war. And we had a couple of Anglos working in the shop from time to time, but that was quite rare. But we did have, in northern New Mexico, the people of Hispanic heritage traced their beginnings back to Spain. So they call themselves Spanish Americans. And to call one of them a Mexican's an insult to them.
Yeah, it's a different. Yeah,
different culture.
Having grown up in New Mexico, I understand those little intricacies of Chicano life.
So here, our friends are proud of their Mexican heritage as well. They should be. I played senior league baseball after I was 60 years old. I got involved in senior league baseball. I was on a team where there were only 2 or 3 Anglos and all the rest were Hispanics, but I spoke some Spanish and had a good accent. So
if you grew up in
Santa Fe,
they
accepted me.
Yeah, I'm sure I understand that as well.
And they were funny too. They were their own. They had their own way with each other, being on a team. That was a lot of fun. So, at any rate,
I think
we had quite a variety of people coming through, working, and it's been a really wonderful, interesting experience. I feel I've had sort of a privileged life. My parents worked hard and gave my sisters and I a good start. And I loved what I was doing. And I forget, some poet or somebody said, if you love what you're doing, it's not work. and I could dress the way I wanted to here in Tucson, especially. I grew long hair and had started growing a beard,
Yeah.
and wearing more jewelry. And my wife sewed me some beautiful ribbon shirts and things like that. And we got into the swing of more ethnic kind of things. And my friends who were attorneys would come in their coat and tie and say, "Gee, Frank, you're lucky. You're in a business where you can dress any way you want to and
Right.
have long hair or whatever, earring and stuff like that."
Right.
So I feel I had the best of all worlds. I knew as a boy that's what I was going to do. There's no doubt in my mind. So I didn't have all the angst of, gee, what am I going to do when I graduate? Am I going to law school? Or,
Right. You knew what your path was.
You
learned it.
I grew up in
At
it.
your father's side,
Yeah.
cutting out those little Lincoln head pennies, and making little
that's
scrap silver.
That's how it sort of
beads.
started,
Yeah.
making beads and
Yeah.
trying to cut out Lincoln head pennies.
Well,
So
I really appreciate you coming in today and spending time with us and letting me. It's a privilege to be able to talk to somebody who's lived a life, a well-done life, who's done what they wanted to do, who's really made a difference in their field, who's left a legacy. And so for that, I really appreciate you making the time, especially during a very difficult time and just, getting in and out and all the things that are going on in the world. So, but thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for asking me, and thank you for those kind words.
Yeah, and I look forward to selling more of your artwork. And I've got some great beads that came in that you've beaded up. And
Sam and I are going through some of our older Thunderbird chop pieces that we've reacquired, and we felt probably the best venue for them is your wonderful gallery.
Yeah, it's an honor to be able to handle that stuff.
So, in my age, I'm spending a lot of my time now preparing for my daughter Susan, who will be my estate executor.
Yeah.
Cleaning out my files, and I love the home I'm in. Donna and I got it in 1976. We've been in it ever since. And it's full of things that we both love that we collected in different places. So I realize I'm getting closer to the end.
Right.
So I'm preparing myself for not to leave a mess for my children to have to deal with. So Donna and I plan to stay in our home, even if we had to hire full-time person to stay in the house and help take care of us. Unfortunately, I lost her 3 years ago, so I'm in the home alone. It's a strange adjustment.
I'm sure. Yeah. Fortunately, you have people like Sam around.
Yeah, I have family. My 3 children are here,
right.
And I have friends. And I went through a rough period after Donna died, and I was introduced to this woman who was a therapist as a career in New York. In fact, she was one of the first women to break the glass ceiling in that field, and she was very involved in the early women's movement with Gloria Steinem and people like that. And she lectured and taught, and she came to Tucson. She experimented with a lot of different spiritual avenues, and she ended up being a Tibetan Buddhist for the last number of years. I told a friend of mine, I'm just so depressed, I need help getting through this period after I lost Donna. He said, I thought meditation would help me. And he said, I know the perfect person for you to meditate. So I met Ruth, and she helped me through this period, and I became very fond of her. She was about 3 years older than I, and she died last year. She had several health issues. She was 89 when she died, but again, I lost somebody I loved very much. But again, she helped me. She changed my life too and made my life a little easier. So I'm learning to accept aging as, to Buddhists, it's just death is another step. It's not
Yes, that's
the
right.
end.
Yeah.
So I sort of adapted that kind of philosophy. So I'm not afraid of facing that I won't be around much longer.
Right.
Ruth told me beginning of last year, this would be her last year. She knew she was dying because of her health issues.
Yeah.
So she was prepared for it, and she helped me learn to prepare for mine. So got off a little on the track there,
But we all have to deal with that at one time or another.
yeah,
You
and
know,
I think people are more accepting now
Yeah.
than they used to be. It was a taboo subject to talk about dying.
Well, but remember, your jewelry will live on.
Well, that's
know?
what pleases me.
Yeah,
I
it'll
like
still be
that
there.
idea.
Your name
Yeah.
will still be spoken.
Yeah.
People will still appreciate all the things that you did over a lifetime way after you're gone. Well, I kind of get that. That's kind of what I do this for too. I want to do these podcasts, so I leave something, a legacy of some type for people.
Well, you're helping a wonderful craftsman and artists extend their legacy too.
Yeah, I want it to be
having
captured.
it available publicly
Yeah, that's
for
right.
Others to enjoy and see.
And learn
And
from. Understand and
Yeah.
all the stuff that goes with it.
Yeah.
So Frank Patania, and we want to make sure we say it. It's Patania, not Patania.
We used to say Patania was my daughter Nancy, who became a civil engineer that wanted to go back to the traditional pronunciation.
Yep.
So it took us a little while to get used to it, but now I like it very much.
Yeah.
It's appropriate.
Well, thank you, Frank, for coming in. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
and
Mark.
we'll make sure we get some of the imagery up on the YouTube venues for people who want to see of some of your work, as well as some of the things we discussed. So, Frank Patania on the Art Dealer Diaries. Thank you. That was
Thank
fun,
you.
wasn't it? I know
Yes.
we want to shake hands, but we can't.
Oh, yeah, I was going to extend my hand.
I know it's something you automatically want to do.
I know.
And I do too.
It's hard to get used to.
Well, we'll get back to it at some point, I hope. We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.